Hey guys, today we are going to talk about big changes that happened in the culture and then we're going to talk about some changes in the way leaders thought of themselves during the Enlightenment period. So a quick little review before the Enlightenment, talking about the Dark Ages, the Middle Ages, and everyone just kind of believed that things happened for a reason. Everyone attributed it to God. If something really good happens to you, it was because God was happy with you. And if something really bad happens to you, it was because God was mad at you. And everything was supernatural. Well, now in the age of Enlightenment, everyone was, well, not everyone, but who we're talking about, these philosophers and thinkers and some of the rich class, the middle classes, they were thinking more of, wow, like maybe there's an actual natural order to this, natural law. Big changes happened during this time. I'm going to talk to you about changes in music and changes in art. Music before, let me get a new page, right before the Enlightenment, music was called Baroque. So I know that for most of you that haven't studied music before, just classical music seems like classical music to you. It all seems the same, but it's really not. It's all broken down. It's kind of like, think of how you're learning in school. And you're learning all day, right? Like school is school. And to someone that maybe has never been to school before, if you met someone out on the street that had never ever been to a school before, then they might think that you come in here and everything's the same all day. But it's really not, right? You go to math class and you go, come on, Mrs. Givens, learn how to spell. You go to math class, you go to history class, you go to science class, and it's all a little bit different. Well, think of that. Instead of saying school, we say musical time periods. And everything that you've ever thought of as classical music, it's not really. Like there's the Baroque time period, there's the Romantic time period, there's the Rococo time period, there's the Classical time period, there's the Neoclassical time period, there's modern. That's what you listen to now. Whatever music you listen to right now, that's modern music. So how do you like this? Back in the day, we're talking like 200 years ago, this stuff that you think of as classical music was the hip, cool music that the young people listened to. Like that stuff that you hear when you're on hold on the phone, or they're playing in an elevator when you're trying to go somewhere. That used to be the cool music that the cool kids listened to. It's just, it seems older now. In the same way that the music that I listened to when I was younger, if you guys heard that today, you'd go, oh, that's horrible. Because I said the same thing when I listened to the music that my parents listened to. But when my parents were young and they listened to it, it was the cool thing. And then now it just seems kind of, bleh, I don't like it. So that's the same thing, but we have to go back and back and back and back and back to like my grandmother's 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 grandmother this was the cool, hip music that all the young kids were really into. And now it just, unless you really like classical music, and I really do, but to most of you, it probably just sounds boring. Well, once upon a time, it was really exciting. So let's talk about, this is shortly before the Enlightenment. You don't have to know the years, just shortly before the Enlightenment was the Baroque period. Of music. And in the Baroque period, I'm trying to talk in terms where you don't have to be a musician to understand this. The best way that I can explain it is if we're listening to the piano, in the Baroque period, it sounds like they're really pressing down really hard on the keys. Everything's really hard. And then in the Enlightenment, the time changed. And now we're in the Rococo time period. And everything got a little lighter. It was lighter and sweeter and more flowery. Like when you're listening to Baroque music, I don't know, you might just think of like, if you close your eyes and you're imagining what you hear, just thinks it sounds kind of hard. And then during the Enlightenment, music just becomes lighter and sweeter. And I have an example for you. We're just going to listen to just a tiny little bit of this Baroque music. Okay, so I don't know if you know anything about the piano, but the low notes, that's the left hand, and the high notes are the right hand. But can you hear how those low notes kind of really sounds like the pianist is like banging on the piano? It's like, dun, 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 like they're really hitting it hard. Now we're going to go over to some Rococo time period music. See how it sounds lighter and sweeter and pretty, like you're walking through a field of flowers. So that's the difference. I mean, that's just two individual songs that I put, but there are really good explanation in the difference of Baroque time period music and Rococo, which also, Rococo was really a very short period of time for as far as music is concerned, and it went into what the true classification of classical music was. Rococo and classical kind of go together because Rococo was so short. But just remember that Baroque music, I don't want to say harsh because I love Baroque music. It doesn't sound harsh. It sounds more like they're really pushing their instrument hard. And then along came the Enlightenment, and Rococo music, everything sounds sweeter and nicer. And it's not just with the piano, it's with any instrument. I just gave you the piano as an example. Now, the same thing happened with art, with paintings. Same thing happened with painting. In the Baroque period, everything was really dark. And then in the Rococo period, things got lighter. And brighter, and things just looked happier. Oops. Things in the Baroque period, they weren't just dark by color, they were also dark by emotion. There was lots of death and murder and just like dark topics in their paintings. I have examples. Here is a Baroque time period painting, and here's a Rococo time period painting. You see how like really, really dark this is? You guys can totally impress your parents the next time they drag you to some art museum that you don't want to be in anyway. If you see a painting that looks like this, it doesn't have to be dudes sitting at a table like this. I just mean this kind of color scheme. If it's really dark like this, it's Baroque. And then this is Rococo. See how everything got lighter and happier? Like these dudes here, they look very serious. And when you go here, you don't really have any idea what's going on, but everything looks happy. See these people, they look happy sitting here. There's a cute little boy with a goat, and this little kid looks like he's playing with the goat too. And this couple, I don't know what they're doing, but they sure don't look angry. They don't look like they're about to get into some big argument. Everyone looks happier, and it's lighter, and it's brighter. That was a big, big change in the arts, in music and painting. This change happened during the Enlightenment. Now, I'll tell you something else. The actual Enlightenment philosophes hated it. They hated it. They wanted everything to be really serious because they considered themselves deep thinking, serious philosophers. Think of that person in your life, especially at your age. I bet you know this person. Think of somebody, one of your friends or just somebody in your class that's really deep and serious all the time. They're very deep, and they try to have these heavily intellectual, philosophical discussions. And if you try to talk to that person about, I don't know, some famous pop musician, they're like, ugh, I don't pay attention to that stuff. That's beneath me. Those were the Enlightenment philosophers. They thought that this change in art was too frilly, and they didn't like it at all. They wanted everything to be very, very serious, and it wasn't serious enough for them. During this time, in the arts and thinkers world, things called salons began. A salon, this is kind of weird, but a salon is like a party, but for thinking. Kind of weird, Mrs. Gibbons. What in the world do you mean, a party for thinking? So what people would do is they would invite a bunch of their friends over, and they'd all sit around and they would just have discussions. They would talk about, what do you think we should do about the government? And how can we make life better? And they would have these like big philosophical debates together. And that's a salon. There are different kinds of salons. There's like an art salon. And an art salon is when people get together to show off their art and to talk about their art together. There are music salons where you might have a whole bunch of musicians all come together and play their new music for each other or talk about their music. But in general, a salon, like if I were going to have a salon in my apartment, I would invite all of these like great thinkers. I would invite my artist friends, I would invite my poet friends, I would invite my philosopher friends, I would invite my musician friends, anyone that like thinks, that just wants to sit around and have a really deep philosophical discussion. That's a salon. Now, there was this one famous thinker in France. I have to make sure I'm spelling her name right. Madame Geoffrin. This is French, so this kind of I don't know how to write that in an English way, but anyway, Madame Geoffrin and Geoffrin, Madame Geoffrin, and she had really, really famous salons. This lady was known for her salons. The best of the best talked to this lady and came to her salons. Like, think of whoever the person is in your class that's like really, really popular. I don't know any of you. I don't know who's the really cool kid and who's the nerd. I don't know, but you know. So think of the really, really, really cool kid in your class that when they have a party, everybody wants to go. That, and like, you know, you're really you're like in the crowd if you get invited to that kid's party. That is Madame Geoffrin. She was really big in having these salons for like heavy thinking. This lady, she was amazing. And she had this person that maybe you've heard of before, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. Hopefully you guys have heard this name before. Mozart is one of the most famous classical musicians of all times. And he used to go and play his piano at her salons. He was a big Enlightenment thinker. Also, side note, Mozart was a child genius, a musical. Mozart was a child musical prodigy. This kid was playing professionally for like huge audiences of people when he was 6 years old. He wrote his first symphony when he was 8. And I meant to have that pulled up for you, but I forgot. So let me, Mozart Symphony 16. Here we are. I'm going to play a little bit of it for you. But it's not playing. Oh, my internet's running a little slow. You just have to bear with me. I don't know why it's going so slowly. Here we go. It stopped, but that was okay because I was going to stop it anyway. 8 years old. He wrote that when he was 8. I know I keep repeating it. That's like, that doesn't really have anything to do with world history class, and I'm not going to test you on it. But I think for life, like, you should just know that Mozart was a child prodigy. And he was writing symphonies when he was 8 years old. The dude was amazing. Think of the best musician you've ever met in your life. He was way better. Okay. Now, let me check my lists. Oh yeah, right. There was one more thing. Novels. Everyone knows what a novel is, right? It's a book that tells a story. Well, before the Enlightenment period, books were used strictly for education. There were school books like math books and science books and history books. And there were, we talked about the encyclopedia that Diderot put together. There were philosophy books, but books, they were strictly for education. But also, only the very, very elite people were educated. They were the only ones that could read. Well, by this time, by the Enlightenment, more and more people were learning how to read. Now we had more of the, okay, so let's say we had the peasants, and that was almost everyone was a peasant. And then we had kind of a small upper class. And then we had a teeny, teeny, tiny little class. This is the ruling class, the crazy rich people. And before, this was the only class of people that could read. These people couldn't read, these people couldn't read. But now, during the Enlightenment, more and more of these people were learning how to read. Like, I don't know, maybe this many of them were learning how to read. And they were the upper class, so they had money to spend. So they wanted to read. But these people, they weren't necessarily only interested in learning to read to make themselves smarter. They just kind of wanted to read for fun. And that's when the novel came about. People started writing just stories. It wasn't necessarily a story to, it wasn't, they weren't just writing science books. They were just writing a story. Here, maybe someone will buy this. I wrote a story about a guy that meets a girl and they fall in love and they live happily ever after. Well, that kind of story, any book that you've read that wasn't like quite literally a school academic textbook, that kind of book came about during the Enlightenment because more people were beginning to learn how to read.